hidden beneath the image of endless golden deserts with its fame and wealth tied to oil. Few know this country boasts 8 UNESCO World Heritage Sites and is a destination for millions of Muslims every year. Kingdom known more through headlines than through its landscapes, its history, or its people. But beyond that image lies a land of sandstone tombs carved 2,000 years ago. Red Sea coastlines alive with coral reefs, mountain highlands that defy every desert cliché, and cities where ancient faith and modern ambition now stand side by side. This is Saudi Arabia, vast, layered, and far more surprising than most of the world ever imagined. Mecca and Medina, the sacred heart of Arabia. Located behind the western mountains of Saudi Arabia lie 2 cities whose names carry more spiritual weight than almost any others on earth. This is Mecca and Medina, the sacred heart of Islam, places that for more than 14 centuries have drawn millions not for spectacle but for faith. Mecca, the holiest city in Islam, is the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad and home to the great mosque built around the Kaaba, the most sacred shrine in the Muslim world. Each year, millions of worshippers arrive here for Hajj and Umrah. During Hajj 2025, the city and its surrounding sacred sites received 1,673,230 pilgrims, including 1,506,576 arriving from outside the kingdom, transforming the city into one of the largest recurring centers of human movement anywhere on earth. But Mecca is more than a destination, it is a focal point. Only Muslims are permitted to enter Mecca, which gives the city a character unlike almost any other place on earth. It is not simply visited, it is approached with ritual preparation, reverence, and intention. 5 times a day, Muslims around the world turn toward the Kaaba in prayer, linking daily devotion across continents to a single point in the mountains of Western Arabia. The city's history reaches back to the earliest centuries of Islam. Muhammad was born here, left it in 622 during the Hijrah, and returned in 630, forever sealing Mecca's role as the spiritual center of the faith. Today, the Grand Mosque surrounds that ancient core on a scale that is vast, luminous, and unmistakably modern. It covers roughly 1.5 million square meters, with an estimated capacity of around 3 million worshippers, while the Mataf area alone can accommodate about 107,000 pilgrims performing tawaf every hour. Then, some 445 kilometers to the north by road, the mood changes. Medina, the second holiest city in Islam, carries a different atmosphere, less overwhelming, more contemplative, a city of refuge, memory, and early community. It was here, in the oasis once known as Yathrib, that Muhammad arrived after the Hijrah in 622, and here that the first Muslim community took political and social form At the center of Medina stands the Prophet's Mosque, one of the most revered sites in Islam, and the place that contains Muhammad's tomb. Geography deepens the contrast between the two cities. Mecca rises among rugged mountains around the great mosque, while Medina sits on a fertile oasis ringed by hills, lava fields, and long belts of date palms. Those palm groves are more than scenery. They help explain why Medina feels different. If Mecca is defined by ritual intensity, Medina is defined by continuity, by the memory of an oasis city where community life, hospitality, and early Islamic history became inseparable. Dates remain one of the flavors most closely associated with Medina, and the city's identity still carries that oasis character. Greener, quieter, and more reflective than Mecca. Together, these two cities define Saudi Arabia in a way no skyline or mega project ever could. One is the axis of pilgrimage, the other is the city of memory. And between them lies the spiritual geography at the center of the Islamic world. Jeddah, where history meets the Red Sea. On the eastern shore of the Red Sea lies a city that has long stood between the wider world and the sacred heart of Arabia. This is Jeddah, the great maritime gateway of the Hejaz, place where trade and pilgrimage shape not just the economy, but the culture itself. Today, Jeddah is home to over 3.7 million people and remains one of the largest and most important cities in Saudi Arabia. Its historical significance reaches back to 646 CE, when the Caliph Uthman designated it as the port for Muslim pilgrims crossing the Red Sea on their way to Mecca. That one decision changed the destiny of the city for centuries. Jeddah was not simply a harbor. It was the threshold through which merchants, sailors, scholars, and pilgrims arrived from Africa, South Asia, Egypt, the Levant, and beyond, turning this stretch of the Red Sea coast into one of the most cosmopolitan corners of the kingdom. At the center of that history stands Al-Balad, historic Jeddah, the old quarter UNESCO calls the Gate to Mecca. This is where the city's Hijazi identity still feels most visible. The streets are narrow, shaded, and dense with memory. Tower houses built by mercantile families rise above the lanes, their facades marked by large wooden Roshan balconies that catch the sea breeze, filter the sunlight, and preserve privacy at the same time. UNESCO describes these houses as a distinctive Red Sea architectural tradition built alongside coral stone houses, mosques, souks, rebats, and small public squares. In other words, Al-Balad is not just a heritage site, it is evidence of a social world built around commerce, religion, hospitality, and constant movement. This is where you begin to understand that Jeddah is not desert Saudi Arabia. It is coastal Hejaz, more outward-looking, more mixed in influence, and more urban in its historical character than much of the interior. And that coastal identity does not end with architecture, it lives in daily life. Jeddah still feels shaped by the sea, in the humidity of the air, in the rhythm of the corniche, in the evening culture of gathering outdoors after the heat softens, and in a food tradition closely tied to the Red Sea, Fresh fish and shrimp, grilled or served with rice and spice, belong naturally to the city's table, while Arabic coffee and shared platters carry the older language of welcome. That blend matters because in Jeddah, hospitality is not expressed in the same atmosphere as the desert interior. It comes through the habits of a port city, a place used to receiving strangers, absorbing influences, and making room for people in transit. Along the modern waterfront, that identity is visible at a different scale. Jeddah Corniche stretches for more than 30 kilometers, while King Fahd's fountain rises 312 meters into the sky, turning the Red Sea into part of the city's skyline. Offshore, coral ecosystems and clear water remind you that Jeddah's natural setting is as important as its architecture. The port still tells the same story in modern form. Jeddah Islamic Port covers 12.5 square kilometers, sits on a route linking Asia, Africa, and Europe, receives about 5,000 ships a year, and today has 62 berths. Those figures help explain why Jeddah still matters so much. It is not just a historical gateway remembered through old buildings. It remains a living gateway to trade, to movement, and to the holy cities beyond. If Mecca represents ritual and Medina represents memory, then Jeddah represents exchange. It is where the Hejaz meets the sea, where Saudi Arabia becomes visibly connected to the wider world, and where the cultural texture of the kingdom feels at its most open, layered, cosmopolitan. Diriyah, where the Saudi story began. If Jeddah is where the Hejaz opens to the sea, then Diriyah is where the interior of Arabia gathers itself into power. Just northwest of Riyadh, on the edge of the Wadi Hanifa oasis, lies a place that does not announce itself with coral facades or Red Sea light, but with earth, geometry, and silence. This is Diriyah, the birthplace of the first Saudi state, a settlement founded in the 15th century and built in the Najdi architectural style that belongs to the center of the Arabian Peninsula. Here, history is not carved into sandstone cliffs or carried in by ships. It is pressed into mud brick walls, fortified compounds, and an urban fabric shaped by heat, scarcity, and the logic of oasis life. UNESCO describes At-Turayif as the first capital of the Saudi dynasty, and that single fact changes how the place feels. These are not simply ruins, but the foundations of a political world that would eventually shape the kingdom itself. At the heart of Diriyah stands At-Turayif, once the seat of the first Saudi state from 1727 to 1818, and today one of the most important heritage landscapes in the country. UNESCO notes that in the 18th and early 19th centuries, the district's political and religious role expanded dramatically, turning it into the center of the temporal power of the House of Saud and a major center of religious reform in Arabia. That deeper role matters because Diriyah represents not only the rise of a ruling house, but the cultural world of Najdi itself. Inland, austere, defensive, and deeply rooted in land rather than sea. The architecture tells that story in every line. Thick adobe walls, fortified edges, and striking geometric decoration were not stylistic flourishes alone. They were building methods adapted to a harsh desert environment and to the needs of authority, security, and community. Diriyah belonged to a culture in which settlement depended on water, palm groves, cultivated land, and control of routes through the interior. This is why Diriyah feels so different from Jeddah. Jeddah absorbed the movement of pilgrims and merchants arriving by sea. Diriyah grew from inland stability, date palms, oasis agriculture, seasonal rhythms, desert hospitality, majlis culture, and the social gravity of families and alliances rooted in place. If coastal Hejaz feels open and outward-looking, Najd feels grounded, inward, and built from the color of the land itself. That is also why the visual experience of Diriyah is so distinctive. At sunrise, the mud brick softens into pale gold. At midday, every parapet and wall edge sharpens under the desert glare. By sunset, the district glows amber, and the old palaces seem to return to the century that made them powerful. Today, At-Turaiff functions not only as a UNESCO site, but as a major heritage destination with more than 1 million annual visitors and 4 museums, according to the official Diriyah site. But even with that modern framing, core meaning of the place remains the same. Diriyah is where Saudi Arabia's story stops looking purely spiritual or maritime or ancient and begins to look political. It is where the desert interior first organized itself into lasting power. Riyadh, the capital of transformation. If Diriyah is where the Saudi story began, then Riyadh is where that story learned how to scale. Rising in the center of Najd, about 600 meters above sea level, few cities in the world have transformed as fast as Riyadh. By the 1930s, Riyadh still had fewer than 30,000 inhabitants inside its walls. Today, it is a metropolis of millions. Highways cut across the desert in sweeping lines. Districts stretch outward in every direction, and towers rise from the plateau like markers of a new national ambition. But Riyadh is not simply a city of speed. It is a city where modern Saudi Arabia still speaks with a Najdi accent. You can feel the contrast between its skyline and its social grammar. Tanika notes that life here is concentrated around more than 18,000 mosques, busy souks, and neighborhoods shaped by privacy, family life, and the rhythms of prayer. The skyline, marked by Kingdom Center and Alpha Salihiyah, projects ambition, finance, and confidence. Yet the older cultural codes remain visible beneath the glass. Riyadh is modern, but it is not detached from the interior culture that produced it. It still feels like the capital of a desert plateau society that expanded outward without entirely giving up its inward discipline. That older layer becomes unmistakable at Mazmak Fort, built of mud brick and tied forever to the 1902 recapture of Riyadh by Ibn Saud. Mazmak is the hinge between the old inland town and the modern capital that followed. Britannica traces Riyadh's deeper roots to the ruins of Ajur, an older caravan center in the Yamama region, and to a chain of settlements along Wadi Hanifa, where wells, palm groves, and fertile land made sustained life possible. In 1824, Riyadh became the capital of the Saud dynasty. In 1932, When the unified kingdom of Saudi Arabia was proclaimed, it became the national capital. That history matters because Riyadh is not just where Saudi Arabia governs itself. It is where the kingdom remembers how power moved from oasis settlement to desert stronghold to modern state. And culturally, Riyadh still carries the habits of Najd, the majlis, the sitting space where news is exchanged, disputes are discussed, and oral tradition is passed on. Remains one of the underlying social forms of Saudi life, while Arabic coffee continues to function as a ceremonial language of hospitality, prepared, poured from a dala, and traditionally served first to the oldest or most honored guest. Official Riyadh tourism material also still presents the capital through distinctly Najdi foodways, highlighting dishes such as kabsa, arish, hashi, markook, and kursan. That is what makes Riyadh more interesting than a skyline alone. It is not simply a futuristic capital rising from the sand. It is Najdi modernized, a city where highways and towers now define the horizon, but where the deeper structure of hospitality, memory, and inland desert culture still shapes how the city lives. AlUla, the desert's ancient secret. If Riyadh is where Saudi Arabia projects its future, then AlUla is where the kingdom steps back into deep time, hidden in the northwest. AlUla is not just a dramatic desert landscape. It is an oasis civilization, a place where water, trade, agriculture, and memory made permanent life possible in a harsh environment. UNESCO describes the wider AlUla landscape as a region that has hosted civilizations from the Neolithic through the Roman and Ottoman eras, while Hegra, at its center, preserves 111 monumental Nabatean tombs, 94 of them decorated, carved directly into sandstone more than 2,000 years ago. That is what makes AlUla so different from the usual image of Arabia. This was never just empty desert. It was a stopping point on ancient trade networks, a place where caravans carrying incense and goods could pause because the oasis sustained them. In Hegra, the tomb facades still show the confidence of a society enriched by movement and exchange, and the site's water wells remind you that Nabatean achievement here was not only architectural but hydraulic. The desert may dominate the horizon, but the real story of AlUla is how people learned to live inside it, and that life was built around the oasis. Official AlUla sources say the shade of 2.3 million date palms allows around 200,000 citrus trees to grow beneath them, while other local crops include herbs, barley, wheat, figs, and olives fed by underground water. In other words, AlUla is not culturally defined by stone alone. It is also defined by cultivation. Dates here are not just food, they are part of the long agricultural system that made settlement, trade, and community possible. That is the deeper cultural key to AlUla. It is a desert place, but it has always depended on a living green core. That continuity becomes even clearer in AlUla Old Town. This was a real urban settlement, not a symbolic reconstruction. Experience AlUla says the old town contained 900 houses, 500 shops, and 5 town squares, forming a dense maze of mud brick and stone. Another official page describes it as a settlement from the 12th century, standing on ancient incense trade routes and also on the pilgrimage road from Damascus to Mecca. The town's 14 gates were overlooked by a 45-meter-high fort dating to around the 10th century. Those details matter because they show that AlUla was not only ancient in the archaeological sense, it remained socially and economically alive for centuries as a market town, a pilgrim stop, and an oasis community shaped by walls, shade, and closeness. Even its most famous natural landmark fits that same logic of scale and memory. Elephant Rock rises 52 meters above the sand, shaped by millions of years of erosion into an unmistakable elephant form. But what matters is not only the geology. Official AlUla materials now present it as a place where people gather at dusk under the stars with food, music, and firelight around one of the region's most recognizable formations. That makes it a perfect symbol for present-day AlUla, a landscape shaped first by nature, then by ancient civilization, and now re-entering modern cultural life without losing the silence that made it unforgettable in the first place. And that is what makes Saudi Arabia so difficult to reduce to a single image. It is not just the land of oil wealth, nor only the land of desert, nor only the land of holy cities. It is all of those things at once, layered over one another across a country, larger and more complex than most outsiders ever imagine. Taken together, these places reveal a country that is not moving from past to future in a straight line. Saudi Arabia moves in layers. The sacred still shapes the modern. The oasis still explains the city. Trade routes still echo in port towns and desert valleys. Hospitality, ritual, food, architecture, and memory remain part of daily life even as skylines rise and infrastructure expands. That may be the real revelation of Saudi Arabia. Beneath the headlines and the stereotypes, this was always a far richer world, a kingdom of pilgrimage and power, of palms and stone, of Red Sea air and desert silence, of ancient continuity and visible transformation. The more closely you look, the more clearly it becomes a place that cannot be understood through one monument, one city, or one narrative alone. And this is Saudi Arabia, the hidden side of the kingdom